Hello and welcome to a new episode of Laravel Core Adventures, where we take pieces of our favorite PHP framework and together figure out how they work in the background. This is level number 2 of Laravel Facades. So let's dive right in. In the first level, I showed you how you can use facades and how you can make use of the same features without facades. In this video, I want to show you how facades work under the hood. We already know that we grab an instance from the service container through the static interface of the facade. But how does this work? Let's start by taking a look at the request facade that we've been using here in this example from the last video. And what you will immediately see, there is no static get method. So we've been using the get method to get a specific parameter from the URL with the request facade. But in here, there is no get method. Instead, the facade only has one method. It defines the key of the service class inside the service container. These underlying classes are also called facade root. This means the class we want to use is bound to the container with the key request. This is also what you see in the Laravel documentation. At the end here we have this facade list, and here we can see the facade, then the actual class that is being called, and here on the right we have the server container binding key. And for our request, it is bound through this request key to this actual Illuminate HTTP request class. And here in this method, we say that request is the key to the class that we actually want to load through this facade. But we're also seeing here that the request extends a base facade class. So let's take a look at that. As you can see, there are lots of different methods here. But when we want to look for a get method, you can see, okay, here is no get method as well. So how does this even work when we're making a call to a static method get, but it doesn't exist in the request class and also not here in this base facade class? It works because here at the bottom of this class, we have this call static method. This method is invoked when we interact with a static method that have not been declared before. So this is a PHP feature, which is also called overloading. So this method gets called when we run the static get method on our request facade, like we did in our controller. It did look like that. So actually every time we use a facade, almost every call to the static method will get to this call static method. So it is a quite important method here. Okay, so what's happening here? First, this method grabs the facade root instance. In the resolve facade instance method, it checks for the instance that has already been resolved. Let's follow it here. All right. Okay, first we're checking if it is already an object, then we return it. And if not, we're checking if the root instance was already resolved. So this means the first time you run a facade, it grabs the instance from the container and it stores it. The second time, it will grab it already and it doesn't need to call it again from the container. So that's what's happening here. And then it gets stored, as I explained for the next calls. Then we're going to check for the instance and return an exception if it is not given. And on the last line, we finally call a method on the root class. In our case, it's the request class, and inside we have the get method we were using. So let's check that out. So in the end, we're going to use this HTTP request class, and in there we now have here our get method. So that's the one that we've been using before. Let's make this visible by dumping out the method names and the classes that are used here from within this method. So first let's get the class from the instance, and then let's also dump out the method. So in our example from the last video, we're going to refresh here the page. Here we can see all the facade calls that happened within our request. So for example, there was a bind method called on the application facade, a policy method on the gate facade, and so on. And here close to the end, we have our get method on the request facade. So quite a few facade calls are happening in this request. And it's good to see that here, so I'd like to dump this stuff out so make this better visible to what is happening. And since we're using the view facade as well, we should see this call in the output as well. And yeah, here we have it at the bottom. And as I mentioned, the view facade is referring to this view factory class. Okay, let's try to sum this up. What looks like a static method call from our facade is just a proxy to an instance from the service container. And inside our facades, like here in the request facade, we are just defining the key of the class that is bind to the service container that we want to use. In our case, it's a request class that's bind to the service container. And then in the base facade, the magic call static method here at the button is going to be called. And in there, we run the method on the instance of the service class that we want to use. Many developers don't like facades because they see the static method calls and think of them as bad practice. And it is true, there are downsides to static methods. But facades are different, and the actual implementation is really nice when you take a closer look. And I hope that I could show you this with this video. And I also hope I could help you to better understand what's happening when you do a facade call. With this important lesson on how facades really work, we're ready to move on and to find out how we can test facades. Because this is also something that people discuss a lot. Because facades are bad to test. At least they say. We are going to find it out in the next video. So stay tuned and see you.